Title: When the Truth Came Out. Part 1. The Shattering of a Quiet Life. In the heart of New York City, hidden behind the crowded streets, lived an 8-year-old girl named Sarah and her 6-year-old sister Emily. They stayed in a small apartment with their mother, Julia. Their father had left the family 3 years ago, and Julia had been raising her daughters alone ever since. She worked 2 jobs and did her best, but often came home exhausted. Sometimes, in her tiredness, she would raise her voice or lose her temper. Sarah, being the older sister, often took it upon herself to protect Emily. But one night, everything changed. Part 2. The Tragic Evening. That evening, Julia came home later than usual. She was already in a bad mood, and the tension in the apartment was thick. She wasn't trying to hurt Emily. She was just a scared little girl trying to do what she thought was right. The court ruled that Sarah would not be punished. Instead, she would enter a therapeutic program for counseling and emotional support. Julia, overwhelmed with guilt, realized how much her emotional absence had affected her children. Part 5. A Future with Hope. A year later, Sarah and Julia had moved to a new city and were continuing therapy. Emily's memory was kept alive in their hearts. Sarah now dreamed of becoming a child psychologist when she grew up to help other kids understand their emotions and protect them from harm. It was a painful chapter, but one that opened the door to healing, growth, and a second chance at life. Part 6. A New Beginning in Willow Springs. After the trial, Julia decided to leave the city and all its painful memories behind. She found a job opportunity in a quiet town called Willow Springs, a peaceful place with trees lining the sidewalks and children laughing in the parks. It was nothing like the life they had left behind. Sarah, now 9, enrolled in a new school where no one knew what had happened to her. But the past wasn't easy to escape. At night, Sarah still woke up crying, clutching her teddy bear, whispering her sister's name. Part 7. The Counselor with the Blue Sweater. At Willow Springs Elementary, Sarah was assigned to meet with the school counselor once a week. Her name was Ms. Kendra, a calm woman with a soft voice and a habit of wearing the same blue sweater every Monday. She never forced Sarah to talk, but let her draw, listen to music, or just sit in silence. One day, Sarah finally asked, "Do you believe people can be forgiven even if they did something terrible?" Ms. Kendra smiled gently and said, "Yes, especially when their heart is still learning how to heal." Part 8. The Library Window. Sarah spent most of her lunches in the school library, sitting by a large window that overlooked a field of sunflowers. One day, a boy named Mason sat down across from her. He didn't ask questions, didn't tease. He just handed her a drawing of a spaceship and said, "You look like someone who's seen stars." They started meeting there every day. Slowly, Sarah felt the weight on her chest lighten. Mason didn't know her story, but he made her feel like she didn't have to carry it alone. Part 9. Julia's Night Job. Back home, Julia took up a night shift at the local diner. Though tired, she promised Sarah that she would never let work come between them again. Each morning, she left little notes in Sarah's lunchbox. "Be brave," in the backyard. Sarah hung a small locket on one of the branches. Inside was a photo of her and Emily, arms wrapped around each other, laughing. "Now she'll always be here," she said. Part 11. Whispers at School. Rumors started circulating when an old newspaper clipping about the trial surfaced. Kids whispered in hallways, stared too long, avoided her. Even Mason grew distant, unsure what to believe. During recess one day, a girl shouted, "Is it true you killed your sister?" Sarah froze. Before she could answer, Mason stepped in front of her. She didn't kill anyone. She loved her sister. That's all anyone needs to know. Part 12. Letters to Emily. That night, Sarah began writing letters to her sister in a special notebook. "Dear Emily," she wrote, "I miss you every day. I hope you're playing with stars and making everyone laugh." She wrote one every night, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. It became her way of healing. She would place the notebook on the windowsill, hoping maybe the wind could carry the words to the sky. Part 13. A Visit from the Past. One day, Judge Grant unexpectedly visited Willow Springs. He had retired and was now touring schools, giving talks about juvenile justice and healing. When he saw Sarah in the audience, his eyes softened. After the event, he approached her. "You're stronger than you realize," he said, "and your truth helped more people than you'll ever know." Part 14. The Fire Drill. During a routine fire drill, Sarah got separated from her class. Trapped in a stairwell, the panic of that awful night returned. Her breathing grew shallow, and tears blurred her vision. A hand reached out. Miss Kendra's calm voice said, "Sarah, you're safe. You're not alone." That moment marked a turning point. Sarah finally agreed to begin trauma therapy sessions with a child psychologist. Part 15. The Scholarship Essay. The school announced a writing contest for a scholarship to attend a summer camp for gifted children. Sarah hesitated, but finally submitted an essay titled "The Girl with the Teddy Bear." In it, she told her story, not as a confession, but as a journey of loss, learning, and love. She won. Part 16. The Summer of Healing. At camp, Sarah met other children with stories like hers. Some had lost parents, others carried invisible wounds. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. She even taught a workshop called Letters to the Sky, where campers wrote messages to people they'd lost. At night, they gathered under the stars and read them aloud. Julia's second chance. Back home, Julia had started night school to study family counseling. She wanted to help other mothers who were drowning in guilt, just like she once had. Watching Sarah bloom gave her the courage to believe that change was possible, even after devastation. Their home now echoed with soft music, open windows, and warm meals. It was not perfect, but it was peaceful. Part 18. Mason's Secret. Before summer ended, Mason invited Sarah there. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a drawing of two girls standing under a tree, one holding a teddy bear, the other a balloon floating to the sky. "That's how I..." She just hugged him. Part 9. She brought her teddy bear. "This was Emily's favorite," she said. "She was my little sister, and I loved her. I made a mistake, but I'll spend the rest of my life loving people the way I couldn't love her enough that day." No one laughed. Some cried. Most clapped. Part 20. The Girl Who Gave Light. Years passed, but Sarah's story lived on. Not as a tale of tragedy, but as a story of how love could outshine even the darkest grief. She became known in Willow Springs as the Girl Who Gave Light. And every spring, the cherry blossom tree in her yard bloomed brighter than any in town. Because healing, like blossoms, comes back stronger each year. Part 21. A Quiet Winter. The first winter after the camp came quietly. Snow fell like feathers outside their windows, blanketing the town of Willow Springs in a soft white silence. Sarah spent her evenings curled up by the fireplace with her journal and her teddy bear, now worn but sacred. Every now and then, she wrote more letters to Emily. "We've made it to December," she'd write. "There's still pain, but also peace." Julia would sit nearby with her textbooks open, studying to become a family counselor, occasionally looking up just to smile at Sarah. There were no more yelling voices, no slammed doors, just the rhythm of healing. One snowy evening, Sarah and Julia sat together stringing lights on the small cherry blossom tree in the backyard. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Part 22. The Return of the Teddy Bear. In February, a local news outlet asked to interview Sarah for a story on childhood resilience. The journalist, a kind woman named Trina, was especially curious about the teddy bear Sarah always held in old trial photos. When asked why she kept it, Sarah answered, "It reminds me that even when everything breaks, something soft can survive." The photo that accompanied the article showed Sarah standing beneath the now bare cherry tree, her arms gently wrapped around the bear. The piece touched hundreds, and letters poured in from strangers, parents, teachers, and children, thanking her for speaking up. For the first time, Sarah saw her past not as a burden, but as something that could light the way for others. Part 23. Mason's Farewell. In the spring, Mason's family announced they were moving to Chicago. Sarah felt the news like a punch to the chest. He had been her anchor, silent, constant understanding. On their last day together, they walked to the sunflower field, now beginning to bloom again. Mason handed her a new drawing. This time, two spaceships flying side by side. One read hope, the other read memory. I won't forget you, he said. Sarah smiled through tears. I'll see you in the stars. They hugged tightly. And as he walked away, Sarah felt both heartbreak and something beautiful, the pain of loving deeply. Part 24, The Mentor's Seat. By the end of 5th grade, Sarah had become a quiet leader in her school. Younger kids often came to her with questions or simply to sit beside her. Ms. Kendra, the school counselor, took notice and invited Sarah to join a mentorship program for children dealing with grief and trauma. Though nervous, Sarah agreed. Her first mentee was a 2nd grade boy named Leo, who had recently lost his father. The two would sit side by side in silence, sometimes drawing, sometimes reading, and when he finally asked, "Does it stop hurting?" Sarah replied, "No, but it stops hurting alone." Part 25, Julia's graduation. Julia completed her counseling degree that summer. The ceremony was small, held in a community center auditorium. As Julia stepped up to receive her certificate, Sarah stood in the front row, clapping harder than anyone. Afterward, Julia kneeled beside her, eyes moist with pride. "I didn't think we'd ever get here," she whispered. Sarah hugged her tightly and said, "We didn't just get here, we built this place." That night, they celebrated with homemade spaghetti and vanilla cupcakes. It wasn't about luxury, it was about survival, love, and growth. And that made it perfect. Part 26, The New Neighbor. In early autumn, a new family moved into the house next door. Among them was a girl Sarah's age named Isabel, bold, loud, and full of energy. She was everything Sarah wasn't, and at first, Sarah kept her distance. But Isabel had a way of knocking down walls. She brought over cookies, asked too many questions, and invited Sarah to everything. Eventually, the two became friends, though Sarah still held a quiet part of herself back. When Isabel finally asked, "Why do you always seem sad, even when you smile?" Sarah simply replied, "Because part of me lives in the sky." Part 27, The Lost Letter. One night, Sarah dreamed of Emily. They were sitting under the cherry blossom tree, now glowing with golden light. Emily giggled and said, "You didn't fail me. You saved me, in the way only sisters can." When Sarah woke, her pillow was wet with tears. But for once, they weren't tears of pain. They were of release. Part 36, Letters from Others. Inspired by Sarah's story, other children began writing their own letters to siblings, parents, friends they had lost. Sarah helped create a small book titled Letters to the Sky, filled with their messages. It was published locally, and copies were donated to libraries, schools, and grief centers. "Our stories matter," she said in the foreword. "They don't have to be pretty, just true." Part 37, The Gifted Student Award. At the end of 7th grade, Sarah received the school's first ever Compassion and Courage Award. It wasn't just for grades, but for heart. As she accepted it, she looked out over the audience, at Julia, at Isabel, at Ms. Kendra, and said, "This is for every kid who ever thought their story was over. It's not. You're still writing it." Part 38, A Note from Mason. On her birthday, Sarah received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a drawing, a sunflower field under a starry sky, and two tiny figures holding hands. It was signed M. Sarah smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Still with me?" she whispered, and she placed the drawing beside her bed. Part 39, The Future in Her Hands. One evening, Sarah sat under the cherry blossom tree with a college brochure at her lap. The cover read University of Child Psychology. She turned to Julia and asked, "Do you think I can really help kids one day?" Julia smiled, brushing her daughter's hair back. "You already are." And Sarah knew this was her purpose. Part 40, When the Truth Came Out, again. Years later, Sarah stood on a stage as a young adult, giving a TED Talk titled When the Truth Came Out. She spoke of grief, guilt, forgiveness, and the power of love. "I once believed I ruined everything," she said. "But the truth is I survived. I healed, and I helped others do the same." The crowd rose in applause. And somewhere, In the branches of a blooming cherry blossom tree, the wind whispered softly, carrying the truth to the sky once more. Part 41. The Scholarship of Memory. By the time Sarah was in high school, her name had already become known in mental health circles. She didn't seek fame, only purpose. When a local university announced a full scholarship for students overcoming childhood adversity, her teacher nominated her. During the interview, Sarah was asked, "Why should your story be remembered?" She paused for a moment, then answered, "Because it isn't just mine. It belongs to every child who ever thought silence was safer than truth." She received the scholarship. But more than that, she received acknowledgement that pain doesn't erase potential. It only proves the heart survived. Part 42. The Empty Bedroom. After Sarah turned 16, Julia gently asked if she wanted to convert Emily's old bedroom into a study space. The room had been untouched for years, still painted soft blue with cloud stickers on the ceiling. Sarah walked inside, breathed in the dust and silence, and sat on the small bed. After an hour, she returned to Julia and said, "Let's keep it as it is. It's not empty. It's full of who she was." And so the room stayed, a quiet shrine to a little girl whose laughter still lived in the walls. Every so often, Sarah would go in, sit on the bed, and talk to her sister in whispers only the room could hear. Part 43. Speaking in front of strangers. Sarah was invited to speak at a mental health summit in Chicago. As she stepped onto the stage, she felt her knees tremble. She looked out at a crowd of strangers and found the courage to begin. "When I was 8, I made a mistake that cost my sister her life. But silence after that mistake nearly cost me mine." She told her story not with shame, but with strength. People cried. People clapped. Some even lined up afterward just to hug her. That night in her hotel room, Sarah called Julia and whispered, "I think she would have been proud of me." Julia replied, "She is." Part 44. Isabel's Breakdown. One night, Sarah found her friend Isabel crying on the swings at the old park. "You always look like you've got it all together," Isabel sobbed. "But I can't even get through one bad week." Sarah sat beside her, took her hand, and said, "I used to break every night. But now I know that healing isn't a destination, it's a daily choice." They sat in silence, and Sarah realized healing didn't mean you stopped hurting. It meant you knew how to walk through the hurt without getting lost. Part 45. Letters Returned. A publishing company reached out to Sarah asking to reprint Letters to the Sky for national distribution. She hesitated at first. It felt too personal, too raw. But when she read the original letters, including her own, she saw something new: resilience, growth, proof that children could survive even the deepest grief. She agreed to the reprint under one condition: a portion of the proceeds would go to therapy funds for children in trauma. "My words helped me," she told the publisher. "Now let them help someone else." Part 46. Reaching the Edge. College wasn't easy. In her first year, Sarah suffered her first anxiety attack during finals week. She felt as if the walls of the library were closing in, her hands shaking, her breath quickening. But instead of hiding it, she reached out. She walked to the campus wellness center, sat down, and simply said, "I'm scared." A counselor responded, "That's okay. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do with it." That moment became a turning point. Sarah learned that healing wasn't linear, and that was okay. Part 47. Return to the courtroom. 10 years after her own case, Sarah returned to the courtroom, this time as a speaker for a juvenile rehabilitation program. The same room, the same judge's bench. But this time, she wasn't trembling. She looked out at the young people before her and said, "What you've done may hurt, but it doesn't define your forever." Afterward, a boy about 13 approached her with tears in his eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt my cousin," he said. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Neither did I, but you're here, and that means you care enough to start again." Part 48. Cherry Tree in Bloom. Back home for spring break, Sarah and Julia returned to the cherry blossom tree. Now tall and wide, its branches reached like open arms. Beneath it, they hosted the 5th annual Emily's Day, which had grown into a town-wide event. Families brought food, Music played softly, and dozens tied memory ribbons to the tree. When Sarah stood to speak, she looked up at the petals and smiled. She's not gone. She just changed places. That night, under the moonlight, Sarah whispered, "You're still blooming with me." Part 49, Julia's office. Julia opened her own family counseling practice that year. Her office walls held drawings from kids she'd helped, including Sarah's old spaceship sketch. On the bookshelf stood a framed photo of Emily and Sarah. One afternoon, Julia found Sarah staring at it quietly. "You saved me," Sarah said. Julia shook her head. "No, sweet girl. You saved us both." They hugged, and for a moment, they weren't counselor and student or mother and daughter. They were survivors of the same long night, walking into the same soft dawn. Part 50, the election. In her final year of university, Sarah decided to run for student body president. Not because she wanted power, but because she wanted change. Her campaign focused on mental health advocacy, trauma-informed classrooms, and safe spaces for students in crisis. During her speech, she stood proudly and said, "We can build a campus where no one is afraid to speak up, where no one feels alone." She won by a landslide, and as she walked off the stage, she looked up at the sky and mouthed, "We did it, Em." Part 51. The letter to her younger self. On a quiet evening in her dorm, Sarah sat down with her favorite pen and a blank page. She had been asked in a psychology class to write a letter to her younger self. At first, her hand trembled, but then the words came, fluid and true. "Dear 8-year-old Sarah, you're not a monster. You're not broken. What happened doesn't erase who you are. One day, you'll find people who understand, and one day, you'll help others carry what you thought you'd bear alone forever. You are worthy of love, even on the days you feel furthest from it. You'll smile again. You'll live, and you'll never forget her, but that's okay. Love, future you." When she finished, she cried, not out of grief, but out of awe. She had made it. She was still making it. Part 52, the ribbon tree. Leadership program. Sarah introduced the Ribbon Tree Initiative. A cherry tree on campus became a place where anyone could tie a ribbon in honor of someone or something they lost. It didn't matter if it was a person, a place, or a piece of themselves. Within weeks, the tree bloomed with colors. Some ribbons had names. Others had drawings, poems, prayers. One day, Sarah found a ribbon tied to the highest branch with a note that read, "Thank you for making space for my silence." She didn't know who left it, but she left her own beside it with a name, Emily. Part 53. The night she doubted again. Even heroes falter. One winter evening, after a tough conversation with a professor who dismissed her advocacy work as emotional distraction, Sarah broke down. She called Julia in tears. "What if I'm just pretending? What if none of this matters?" Julia didn't lecture. She didn't reassure. She simply said, "Sweetheart, pretend love doesn't change lives. Go look at the tree. Go read the ribbons." Sarah bundled up and walked through the snow to the ribbon tree. Wind tugged at the fabric pieces, but they held strong. She stood in silence for a long time, then whispered, "It matters," and she went back stronger. Part 54. Mason's return. In the spring of her junior year, Sarah attended a national trauma and resilience conference in Chicago. She didn't know Mason would be there until she saw him, taller now, his hair longer, his eyes still kind. When their eyes met across the conference hall, time folded. They reunited over coffee, catching up on years of growth, grief, and hope. "You turned out exactly like I thought," he said. "How's that?" Like someone who turned pain into a lighthouse. They didn't speak of love, but in the quiet way they held their gaze. It was there, unspoken but alive. Part 55. The empty seat. One day, while giving a guest talk in a juvenile center, Sarah noticed a chair in the back of the room with a worn-out teddy bear placed gently on it. She hesitated during her speech, eyes glued to that seat. Afterward, a young girl approached her. "I brought the bear," she said, "because I read your story. And I have one too." Sarah crouched to the girl's level. "You're not alone anymore." They didn't exchange names, but the girl left with a hug and hope. That chair and that bear became a symbol. The seat always remained in the room for the next hurting soul who needed it. Part 56, Julia's book. That summer, Julia published a memoir titled What We Survived. In it, she detailed her failures, her guilt, her journey from numbness to nurturing. She told her story not to earn sympathy, but to encourage other parents to recognize their children's emotional world before it was too late. On launch day, Sarah introduced her mother. The audience, and Sarah took the mic. My mother made mistakes, but she didn't give up. And in that, she taught me what real love looks like. It was the first time Julia cried in public. Part 57, The Candle Project. Inspired by the candlelight vigils of her youth, Sarah created a traveling art installation called The Candle Project. Each candle in the exhibit represented a child lost too soon, some by accident, some by violence, some by silence. Visitors could light a digital candle, leave a message, or simply sit in the quiet. The final candle in the exhibit bore a plaque. For Emily, the first light that led me home. The project toured schools, community centers, and churches across 5 states. People began to whisper her name, not in pity, but in reverence. Part 58, Dreams of the Courtroom. By her senior year, Sarah had set her sights on law school, not to prosecute, but to protect. She dreamed of becoming a child advocate attorney, ensuring no child went unheard in court the way she once feared she would be. During her application essay, she wrote, "I was once a child in a courtroom, not because I was guilty, but because I was lost. Now, I return not to relive the pain, but to hold the hands of those still wandering." She was accepted into Columbia Law. Julia framed the letter. Part 59, Emily Scholarship Fund. To honor what would have been Emily's 18th birthday, Sarah and Julia launched the Emily James Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually. Grief built a bridge to someone else's heart. Every year, more stories emerged of survivors of hope. And every year, Sarah sat in the front row, clutching a ribbon and whispering her sister's name as the audience clapped. Part 60, The Night Sky. On a warm summer evening, Sarah stood barefoot in the backyard of the home where it had all started. The cherry tree was full and fragrant. Stars littered the sky like tiny promises. She raised her eyes upward. "I don't cry for you anymore," she whispered. "I live for you now." A soft breeze rustled the petals. Inside, Julia prepared dinner. Her office light glowed. The future waited, bright, uncertain, but full of meaning. And in every breath Sarah took, in every life she touched, Emily's light flickered on. Not a tragedy, but a legacy. The first case. Sarah's first case as a law school intern came sooner than expected. A 10-year-old boy named Malik was found in a domestic violence situation. Sarah wasn't yet licensed to represent him in court, but she was allowed to sit beside him during questioning. She recognized the fear in his eyes. It was the same fear she once carried. She handed him a soft blue ribbon. "This is for holding on," she whispered. Malik clutched it tightly. When a social worker asked a difficult question, Malik didn't look at them. He looked at Sarah, and he answered. That day she knew this wasn't just a job. It was a calling. Part 62, Julia's health scare. One autumn morning, Julia fainted at work. The diagnosis, a mild stroke brought on by years of high stress and little rest. Sarah flew home immediately, sitting beside her mother's hospital bed. Watching machines beep softly, Sarah felt that familiar ache, that terror of losing someone again. Julia woke, groggy but smiling. "I'm not leaving," she said. Sarah gripped her hand. "Promise me you'll start living for yourself too." "I am," Julia replied. "Because of you." That night, Sarah stayed in the room, rereading their old letters and feeling the strength of a bond not even grief could break. Part 63, A Voice on the Air. A national podcast invited Sarah to tell her story, this time not just as a survivor, but as an advocate. The interview aired to millions. She spoke softly but powerfully. "I used to think healing meant pretending it didn't happen. Now I know it means building something honest out of what broke." The episode went viral. Letters flooded in again. One girl wrote, I've never told anyone what happened to me until now. And so, Sarah's voice traveled through wires and airwaves, reaching places her feet never could. Emily's name was spoken by strangers. And that too was healing. Part 64, The Proposal. Years later, Sarah reconnected with Mason, this time not at a conference, but at a quiet coastal cafe, far from headlines and stages. Their friendship had always been a quiet undercurrent, always waiting. On a rainy afternoon, as they watched waves crash onto the shore, Mason knelt and opened a small box. Inside was a ring, simple and silver, with two engraved stars. Not to erase your past, he said, but to promise I'll never let you face the future alone. Sarah's hand shook. I was broken once, she said, but I'm not afraid to build something now. She said yes. Part 65, A Room with Two Cribs. When Sarah and Mason were expecting their first child, they set up the nursery together. But halfway through, Sarah quietly added a second crib, just a symbolic one, placed beside the real one. For the sister who didn't get this, she said. They filled it with soft toys, a ribbon, and a framed photo of Emily. When their daughter was born, they named her Elena, a name that means light. And when little Elena laughed in her sleep, Sarah sometimes swore she heard another giggle echoing softly in the corner. Part 66, The Emily Foundation. With Julia's blessing, Sarah and Mason established the Emily Foundation, a nonprofit offering therapy scholarships, legal aid, and emergency shelter to children and teens in crisis. Its logo, a teddy bear beneath a cherry tree, with stars in the background. On opening day, Sarah gave a speech. This isn't about a tragedy. It's about transformation. Every scar tells a story. Ours began with silence, but it ends with purpose. Donors wept. Volunteers cheered. And somewhere, unseen but deeply felt, Emily's presence wrapped around a second life. You turned pain into protection, silence into speech. If I taught you anything, let be this: love fiercely, forgive often, and never stop planting light where there's darkness. I'll see you in the cherry blossoms. Love always. Mom. Sarah didn't cry at first. She planted a new cherry tree beside the old one and read the letter out loud beneath its branches. Part 68. Elena's question. One night, 6-year-old Elena sat on her mother's lap and asked, Mom, who is Emily? I see her name on your necklace. Sarah took a deep breath. She was my sister. She lives in the sky now. But everything I am, everything I've done, is because she was here, even for a little while. Elena tilted her head. Do I look like her? Sarah smiled and kissed her forehead. You laugh like her, and that's the most beautiful sound in the world. Part 69. Full circle. Years passed. Sarah became a well-known child advocate attorney, traveling across the country to reform juvenile law. She trained judges, defended abused children, and wrote a best-selling memoir titled The Light I Carried. But every spring, no matter how busy she was, she returned to Willow Springs. There, under a blooming cherry tree, dozens gathered for Emily's Day, a tradition that spanned generations now. Sarah would always speak last. Her final words never changed. She was my sister. She taught me how to love with everything I had, even when I was afraid. And that saved my life. Part 70. The final letter. On her 50th birthday, Sarah sat under the cherry blossom tree, now surrounded by children, flowers, and laughter. She opened a notebook, the last of many, and wrote her final letter to Emily. Dear Em, you're everywhere. In Elena's voice. In our garden. In every kid who finds their way to hope. I used to cry because you were gone. Now I smile because you were ever here. You didn't just shape my story. You're my story. And because of you, it's a good one. Love always. Your big sister. The petals danced above her, and in that moment, all was still. All was full. The truth had come out, and it had blossomed into a life worth living.